plants have specialized tissues that make vessels. In other words, essentially big tubes to transport material through the plant. And we're going to say that. Sorry, I'm in your way, aren't I, Samantha? Is that better? Perfect. You're welcome. What materials need to be moved around? Water, good. Water is a big one. We know that water is used in photosynthesis. So it needs to be moved up to where in the plant does photosynthesis happen? Where in the plant does it take sunlight and turn it into energy? The leaves. Good. So we need to get water up to the leaves. Of course, water doesn't come from the leaves. Maybe a little bit. If it rains, it gets some water on them. But mostly water comes from way down in the soil. So we have to move it. What else do we have to move? Well, what gets made in the leaves? Howdy.
Do you have any snowflakes?
Mine got handed in this morning.
Oh, perfect.
Because what am I, team?
Yes. Thank you.
There you go.
Carry on.
Of course, the actual truth is that Kaylin Clark came and said, hey, I should take these. And I said, sure, yeah, grab them. But whatever. It was a period 1 thing. Take it up with your period 1 teacher. Who's your period 1 teacher? Yeah, shame on Linjal. Oh, well then shame on you. So shame. What else does a plant move? So it has to move water around. What gets made in the leaves? What is the end product of photosynthesis? In photosynthesis, plant takes in water from the soil, it takes in CO2 from the air, it takes in sunlight, and it makes some oxygen, true. Though actually the oxygen plants make, they don't use. They just let it float off into the atmosphere. So they do make it.
I want to say something I don't think it's...
Well, you're right or you're wrong.
Chlorophyll?
Chlorophyll is what does the doing. That is the pigments that are involved in undergoing photosynthesis, absolutely. They make sugars. But of course, is the plant, the leaf, the sugary part of the plant that you eat for all that sugary goodness? Not usually, right? So they take those sugars and they move them around the plant. Mint leaves are delicious, but I don't know if we think of them as being like sugary goodness. What else gets moved around? Yeah, now CO2 doesn't actually have to get moved very much because the leaves are able to absorb that just from the air. So there's probably some CO2 that gets transported, but it's not a major one because the leaves are able to do that right at the source. But we could just say other nutrients. What do I mean by this? Messenger compounds. What's the human equivalent of that? What's a human messenger compound called? The body produces them, move in your bloodstream. And tell your whole body to engage in one sort of reaction or another. Sorry? Your nerves are something that does something similarly, but they use electricity but we have little chemicals that we can dump into our bloodstream. Hormones, yeah. And plants have equivalents. So if a plant is damaged, it will release a signal into its fluid system that sends the message to the whole plant, hey, we need to repair. Or if it's under attack, if there's aphids on its leaves, it can actually send signals through its transport system that say to the rest of the plant, let's get ready to react to this. So, excuse me. So there we go. Now, what does the moving in a plant? What does the moving in our body? So we have a circulatory system, we have vasculature, and what's inside there moving? Blood. And what's blood made of primarily? Plasma. And then in the plasma are the cells, right? And plasma is basically water. Very good. Plants use a similar system. The main thing that does the moving is water. Bless you. So it's the water that moves through a plant, and as a rule, the main flow of water is in what direction in a plant? Where does most of the water come from? Very good. It comes from the soil and it needs to go up the plant. So the primary flow of water in a plant is in the upward direction. From the ground into the roots, from the roots up the stem or the trunk, and then to branches, leaves, and flowers. You could add fruit in there, but you get the idea. That's the basic flow chart, pun intended, take that, Calfred, of water flow in a plant. Now, there is a secondary system that can move water in different directions. All right, so that is the main idea, which is that mostly water is going to flow up the tree, but that it is possible using a secondary system to move things in other directions. We're going to talk about how that works in a bit. Now, there's two distinct types of cells that are responsible for this, and they are called, and I wonder if any of you have heard these terms before. I know I hadn't before I studied biology. You might be better educated than I. How do you pronounce this? Xylem. From the same root as xylophone. So xylem cells are And xylem cells are interesting because once they grow into place, once they end up where they need to be, the cells actually die. To save energy, the plant doesn't need xylem cells to be living cells. They can just be dead cells. They just form structural tubes. They just get there. On the other hand, very good. We're looking at the next page. Or are you just a super genius? You are too good. I've always said it. That guy, too good. Phloem is responsible for the multi-directional flow of materials from any place to another place. And these are living cells that are actively in control of moving nutrients. I'm setting up an experiment in the back that I thought it would be fun to run. I've never run this before, and I have no idea if we're going to get good results or no results at all. It's my favorite kind of experiment. No, that didn't work out. But I never mind. Can I tell you something? If you're going to be a scientist, you got to become well acquainted with failure. Because it's a major part of the game. You will do lots of things that fail, and that's okay. Okay, so xylem I'm going to draw an extremely accurate plant. Plant makes perfect sense. It's got two leaves on top. hey, with what kind of leaves would we call these? Sorry? Parallel. Hey, if it has parallel leaves, how should I draw the roots? Is this going to have veiny, like a taproot or fibrous roots? Very good. It is going to have fibrous roots. In fact, I wish I'd even gone finer than that. All right, so xylem moves in one direction and one direction only. Water is going to come up through the roots and up through the leaves and eventually actually escape the leaves in the form of water vapor. So water goes from the ground into the roots, eventually up to the leaves, and that actually evaporates into the air. There's a constant flow up, and the rate can be adjusted. So, what makes this flow happen? Why would water flow up? Now, I don't know how much of an expert you are in physics, but my understanding is that as a rule, gravity pulls things down. Very good. There's three things at work. Now, the first is there is some active pumping. So one way you could get water to go up a hose up to a higher level is you could pump it from the bottom. Does that make sense? And a little bit of that does happen. So this is what we call root pressure. And the roots contain cells. That actively pump water into the xylem. This builds up pressure. And it moves water up. Okay, that one's pretty intuitive, right? You can imagine that if you had a tube pointing straight up and you pumped water into the bottom of it, it's going to work its way up, right? The problem is, as plants get really tall, that would require an incredible amount of pumping pressure at the bottom to get the water to go up. Does that make sense? So pumping alone isn't going to do the job because that would very much restrict the height at which you could build. This, by the way, a real issue for building buildings as well, right? You have to have infrastructure in place to make sure water can get pumped all the way up. You ever seen pictures of like tall buildings in New York City or Toronto? What do they have on their roofs? They have water towers, which are there to equalize out pressure, because if too many people in the building turn their water on at once, the pumping at the bottom just can't keep up. And so you have these water towers on top that can help provide water during high usage times to keep the pressure going. It is a lot of work to pump water up. And a plant can't get very tall just using active pumping in the roots. Does that make sense? It'd just be too much work. It's too energetically expensive. So there's a second thing, and this one's weird. All right? It's a little weird, but I'm going to see if I can demonstrate it. Okay. This is a little bit strange, but if you look here, if I put water in a test tube, and you've all experienced this, though maybe you haven't thought about it. If you look at it straight on, is that water making a perfectly flat line? What's it look like? Pass that around.
It looks like there's like a contact lens.
So, look here. We take a test tube and we fill it with water. And does the water look like this? No. What does it look like? We don't get a nice, clean, straight line like that. So what does it look like? Not like that. What's it doing? And the answer is, it's tugging up on the sides of the glass like that. Does that make sense? Now, the reason it does that has to do with the very nature of water. And part of what makes life possible is that water has some really interesting properties. And one of the interesting things about water is that water has cohesive and adhesive tendencies or properties. What does it mean to be cohesive? You know this if you have ever seen water on the windscreen of a car, right? Like the glass window of your car. When that one works. It'll work in the future. You've seen this. You've seen water land on the windscreen of your car. It doesn't spread out perfectly. What does it form? Sure, trail and like droplets, right? Why does water form droplets? Shouldn't it just spread out? It's a liquid. We were always taught that liquid takes the shape of its container. It doesn't. If you drip water on something, it will form a droplet until that droplet gets too big. And then when that droplet gets too big, then it will spread out. But its first instinct is to make a droplet. Why? Because water is cohesive. It sticks to itself. Water likes to stick to itself. Which is why it's very hard to pull like just you can't like pull a water molecule off something, right? If you scoop water, you take a bunch of it, it sticks to itself, right? If you don't very carefully contain it, it will go back and end up with the rest of the water all stuck together in a mass. Does that make sense? Which is why you can drop water on the surface of a table like this, and it will form a bubble like that. Oil doesn't do that. It's not the same way at all. Try it. I mean, don't, because it makes a big mess. But if you put a drop of oil on something like that, it will just spread out. It doesn't stay in that nice, neat droplet. It's a tendency of water. Water is cohesive. It sticks to itself. But it also is sometimes adhesive. There are some surfaces water likes to stick to. Other surfaces it doesn't. You ever bought really cheap paper towels and they just do not seem to pick up water? Yeah? Or like really cheap towels, or towels before they've been washed a few times and they don't absorb any water? Water sticks to some things and doesn't stick to others. As it happens, water sticks to glass nicely, which is why we did that. And water sticks to xylem nicely. The material that xylem tubes are made of, water sticks to. So it will tend to raise the sides like this. Well, there's an interesting thing that happens, which is that the narrower you make the tube, the more water will rise in it, up the edges. That's just, and the math on it's actually fairly simple. You could ask Calford to show you, and I bet he'd figure it out. But if you reach a certain threshold, all of a sudden, the water will just rise up the tube and just fill it, all on its own, naturally. Just the narrower you make the tube, the higher it raises up the sides, and at a certain point, the tube is narrow enough that it will just rise all the way to the top, up to a certain height. This is called capillary action. And these tubes are capillary tubes. They may or may not be fine enough for water. I don't know what diameter these were ordered as. I need an open bottomed one. So we'll do the highly scientific thing of breaking it. There we go. This is sharp, so be careful. I'm on it. But if I take this here, and I don't know if this one is fine enough or not, it probably won't go all the way up the tube, but I think it will come some of the way up the tube if I put it in here. So if I put it in there, we should actually see the water come up into this tube above just the water level. And you can come take a look at your convenience. We go here, and can you see that? It's not going all the way up the tube, but it is a higher water level than what's in the test tube. Can you see that? Right. That is called capillary action. And I didn't do that. I didn't do anything to make that happen. I just put it into that water. You can repeat it. I put it in there, and the water rises up the tube all on its own. Right up. And you can see, even now that it's open on the bottom, it actually doesn't fall out because it's cohesive and adhesive. It's sticking to itself, and it's sticking to the glass tube. Now, this tube is only fine enough to give us about 2 centimeters of lift, which doesn't make for a very tall plant. But in terms of cells, that's a really big tube. If you want the water to raise higher, you make the tube smaller. Right? And so the trick to xylem is, instead of having one big tube, one big pipe, you get that same diameter, but you make it full of millions of little tiny tubes, and each of those draws water up in it, and the water goes up the pipe all on its own. No reaction. We use a similar thing as engineers. If an engineer wants water to go up a distance without any active necessity, so if you look here, it goes right up. See that? Show the same thing. So if you look, I put that in. Goes up to maybe higher than water. It's not that exciting, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Way right up. Taller than water. Can you see that? Again, here you're getting what? A centimeter? But the smaller the tube, the greater the lift. Yeah, right. Could be an inch. Right? Which is a small effect. Again, what? A centimeter? But, sorry? Am I a witch? Oh, I am. I'm a witch. Now, believe it or not, but that stupid little tiny effect you saw right there actually saves a plant tremendous amounts of energy. Because by just making its xylem, instead of being one big tube of water, which is how we build our water pipes, right? Just build a copper pipe, and if you need more water, you make it bigger. Plants make the xylem millions of tiny tubes, and if you need more water, you make more tubes. But the tubes being incredibly narrow in diameter means that water draws itself up the tubes passively by capillary action. Water does it itself. You don't have to put energy in. Free energy. All right, so that's two of the three ways that plants get water to move up the xylem. First, by actively pumping water into the roots. Second, by capillary action, which draws water up the tube and prevents it from falling back down. Right? You saw that even when I took that out of the water, it didn't fall back down, which means that even if there's a break in water supply somewhere in the plant, the whole column of water doesn't come crashing down and the plant doesn't die. Water will tend to stay where it is. But there's one more element, which comes back to this cohesive tendency. It's called transpiration pull. And if you're ready, yet more amazing art. You might be thinking, hey, Orlando, isn't this a handout that's pre-printed? Couldn't you have had this diagram on here? Yes. Yes, I could have. Why didn't I? Yeah, it would be some sort of crime to deprive the world of this. And listen, I've always said you got to give the people what they want. And what the people want, my art. I get it. It's a curse. It's a gift. It is. It's just, you know, I could try to run away from it, but you got to give the people what they want. Okay, ready? We are going to look at a cross section of a leaf. All right, can you imagine? So look here. What we're going to imagine is that we're looking at the very top of this leaf, and we're seeing here are all of the cells that make up the leaf. And here is where some xylem lives. So these are xylem cells. Look at me, I'm a xylem cell. And you see how they're just kind of big tubes? Again, this is a cross section. What do I mean by a cross section? It means that all of these would be plant cells. Here we are, I'm full of plant cells. Oh, look at us all. Nice plant cells, living our plant cell lives. This one's name's Tim. He went to plant art college. He waits tables to pay the bills, but he runs like an art co-op on the weekends. You know, doesn't make much money, but it feeds his passion. So there they all are. And up here is the air. Right? Up here is the air. I'm not going to use blue because I'm going to use blue for water. So up here is the air. And the air is, outside the cell. So this right here, just to be clear, is a xylem tube. And we've cut it open. So like the xylem tube cell would go kind of like this. We've like cut it open. Does that make sense? We're looking inside of a xylem tube. It's as if we'd cut this straw this way. Does that make sense? So here is the transport. That water comes up. And so here's what we want to take away from this. After all that, water molecules stick to each other. Does that make sense? So if we look up this tube, there's a water molecule. Oh, look, there's another water molecule. What's next to that one? Another water molecule and another water molecule going up the tube. Great. And then like here's another one forming like a little bubble at the surface because we know water will do that, right? You've seen water in a straw and it like bubbles over the top. Great. So here we are. There's our water in our xylem, which is all awesome, except what happens to water if you leave it exposed to air? It evaporates. That's right. So the air is going to come along and it's going to take this water molecule with it. It's going to say, hey, water molecule, let's evaporate away. But as it evaporates, it's going to pull the one behind it up because water sticks to itself. So as the air comes and pulls this molecule away, in fact, I should draw that arrow to evaporates in the other direction. Would be more logical. As the air comes and pulls this molecule away, this molecule was stuck to this water molecule, and it might not have enough energy to pull it away with it, but it has enough energy to pull it up into place. And that means that that water molecule is going to pull on this one, because they're cohesive, and that one's going to pull on. And it's like, you ever had the barrel of monkeys when you were a kid, or am I too old and this is the thing that people don't have anymore? It's a toy and they all stick together, and you pull one and they all come together, right? Water is like a big old barrel of monkeys. You pull on one, and they form a big chain. Each pulls on the one behind it. So we can say that xylem ends in the leaves. And the end point of a vein, of a xylem tube, is an opening in the leaves called a stomate. The plural is stoma. I'm going to make that all caps to be stylistically consistent. One stomate, two stoma. One raviolo, several ravioli. One cello, several celli. All those Italian pluralizations are always I's. This H to A. At the stoma, water evaporates into the air. But because water is cohesive, sticks to itself, evaporating water pulls water up the tube behind it. This is called transpiration. And it's actually the main driving factor of moving water up the plant. Yes, there's some pumping down at the roots that takes place. Yes, there's some capillary action. But the single driving factor, the thing that provides the most force to move water up the plant, is actually water evaporating into the air at the leaves, at the stoma. Hi.
Can I still touch Anna for like
Yeah,
1
you bet.
second?
You can keep her.
Thank you.
No problem. No offense, but get out of here. This is noteworthy because it means in really humid air, where there's already lots of water in the air, evaporation happens slower and water will move up through the plant slower. So actually on really, really wet, damp days, it's actually a little bit harder for a plant to move water up through it because it relies on evaporation to move up. There's also something really interesting, which is the purpose of the stomates is that if you want to stop water from moving out of the plant, what can you do with the openings at the leaves called stomates? You can just close them. Does that make sense? And if you close the stomates, water can't escape, transpiration stops, and it prevents water loss. When does a plant not need water to be moving up to the leaves, fresh water? Yeah, during winter and during winter long term, and even on the short term, nighttime. You can actually try this, and I do this. Does anyone have a nice big tree in their yard somewhere in their house? Or near their yard? You want to look like a real weirdo to your neighbors? Go out during the day on a hot summer day. Measure it around. Measure how big it is around. This won't work so well now because you're like you said, winter, that's the second one. This whole transpiration system basically shuts down all winter. In fact, the xylem can actually flow in the opposite direction in winter because you don't need this system in the winter. You don't photosynthesize. The plant basically lies dormant in the winter. But in the summer, a hot summer day, go out and measure the tree around. And during the day, this is in full force, and that water is pulling up the tree, pulling up all the water, transpiration pull. And go out at night when the plant shuts these openings to save water, because there's no reason to have water flowing to the leaves when there's no photosynthesis happening. Go measure the tree again, and it will be fatter. It will be wider around, because all that upward, and it will be a little shorter. The tree actually is taller during the day. That transpiration pull literally is pulling the tree up, and is literally shorter and squatter at night, because all that transpiration pull has shut down. You can go try it. It's measurable. It is a measurable difference. Yeah, meaningful. It's not going to like double in size, but like you can absolutely measure it with nothing but like a seamster's tape measure. And then, in the winter, you see the same thing, where it gets shorter and squatter because all of that upward directional flow that you see during the summer, when those leaves have to be active, turns off. On the other hand, an evergreen tree, you're going to still see all that during winter because it still engages in active transport all winter. Now, how do the stomates open and close? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a very clever system. These are actual micrographs, so these are what these things actually look like. Here it is diagrammatically, but basically, it's two water balloons, and if you have them with just a little bit of water in them, they plant close to each other. And then if you hyperinflate them, if you fill them with water, they have to get longer to fill all the water in. But because they're tied together at the ends, as they get longer, they have to open up into a circle. Does that make sense? So this is pumped full of water. Stomates open. And in this case, low water pressure. The stomates close. So the default position of a stomate is closed, And if the plant wants to open it, it has to pump some water into them and pump them up. And again, you can imagine that if you had just one balloon and you pump more water into it, it gets longer, right? Like picture like party balloon. Well, if you have two of those and you tie them together at the end, as they get longer, they have to force into a circular shape, which opens them up. And again, like you can really see this in microscopy. That is a cross section of the surface of a leaf. And so that down there is the actual vein. That's the xylem that goes all the way. If you were to jump in there, magic school bus, Miss Frizzle, go for a ride in there. You could go all the way down the plant, all the way to the leaves. You are in a leaf. All the way down to the roots. The pumping of water into stoma is an active process. And there's 2 cells for every stomate, and they call those the guard cells, which makes sense if you think about it. You can kind of imagine them standing on guard, and they decide whether to open the stomate or to close it. Okay, coming back to the topic of stupid things that might fail miserably. And actually, it's not fail because I'm just curious. I have a question for you. I'm curious to know what you think. So, what do I have here? I do have water. I have water, and I have water, and I have a Tupperware container, and I have a beaker, and I have a tube. Well, and if you look, these form a continuous system right now. In fact, if I were to pour more water into this one, it should go into that one and vice versa. In fact, let's do a test of this. If I take some water out of here, these should come back to being at the same level because they're in a system together. So if you look, given a few seconds, water is actually going to move from this one to that one to level those out. Does that make sense? Because I have an unbroken tube here, there's a continuous flow of water between the two, and they should reach a standard height. Does that make sense? And if I put this in here, it should actually make its way back to the other. Or it won't. I mean, these are the two possibilities. But if you come back looking at this a few minutes from now, this should have drained back so it's back to the same height as that. And you can see it's happening already. Can everyone see that? So I have one system here. That's not my question. That's pretty cool, right? Hey, physics. Go, Orlando. You can teach physics. Not well, though. But here's my question, leading into what we're going to talk about for the end of today and then tomorrow. If I dropped food coloring in here, obviously it's going to spread out and fill that water, right? Here's my question. Will it go through the tube and fill that one? Now, I don't know, because there's gravity to deal with, right? Which is, gravity pulls things down. Food coloring has mass, so it should be pulled down. Will food coloring go across from one place to the other? I don't know the answer to that question, so I thought, you know what we could do? Put some food coloring in there. Seems like a good idea. So I'm going to go get some. Because maybe came and got his back, and then we're going to try it. I have a theory, which is I think two things are going to have to happen. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to put a bunch of this into this beaker. And I think that that will do half the job. Well, I don't want to add more water. I'll show you. So first, let's just do this. This might do it all by itself. Let's find out. I'm putting a fair amount in, and you can see that it starts to spread out. This is a process called diffusion, which is, it is one of the great natures of the universe that materials tend to spread from areas where there's a lot of them to areas where there's not a lot of them. You've experienced this if you've ever walked down the hallowed halls of Eastdale and discovered some fine young chap, usually a grade 9 boy, who's recently discovered that he stinks and is trying to solve this problem with Axe body spray. Right? And he thinks, if a little bit of Axe body spray makes me irresistible, a lot of Axe body spray will make me even more irresistible. Right? You know this guy? We've all seen this guy. And so all of a sudden you go in the hall and it's like, oh, good Lord, what is going on here? And it starts, because it's probably one of Calford's kids, right? And so it starts like around his room is like inescapable. And then before you know it, you're smelling it by Lastchuck's room, then by Bainbridge's room, then by the office before you know it. And then eventually you don't smell it at all because it just spreads out. This is the nature of things. So that food coloring should spread out. Now, as it happens, it's got a bit of weight to it. And so it is collecting in the bottom. So I'm going to do a little bit of cheating and stir it. But I think there's one other thing we're going to have to do. I think even then, it's not going to want to work its way up this tube because it's heavy. Though it might. It might. And we'll leave this as long as we need to. But I am going to do one little cheat in the short term, which is to help it along its way. There's another thing we could do, which I just showed you. I mean, one thing I could do is I could heat it up. When you heat things up, it makes diffusion happen faster. But there's another thing that might help, or it might not, which is I could actually take water from here, and as I take, look, do you see it? Look at that. And there it goes. Just like that. Now, why did that happen?
Well, as soon as you took that bit of water out, it
Instantly, right? And look at that. And let's be clear, that's elegant. Isn't that pretty? That.
It's a reaction to looking at balance mostly, and it shows that like food color.
And then actually, I could make it happen again if I put this water in here. See, I can control the flow of stuff. It was all over here, and I was able to make it go there with just a minor adjustment, just by taking some water out of here. And I had two choices. I could take some water out of here, and that worked, or I could add some water here, and that also worked.
Is this related to, there's this video I watched called Delta P, and it talks about something like this, but in like bigger scale, where like difference in water pressure like sucks it in. Obviously.
Yes, yeah. Delta, in science, delta means change in or difference in. And P is pressure. And there are two things exerting pressure here. There's what we call the water pressure, which is the pressure exerted by the water, and that's half of it. And then there's something called the osmotic pressure. Have you heard of osmosis before? Osmosis is, why, hello. You weren't expecting this, were you? No, I was not. Oh, come back. What happened? Oh, he's gone. Hello? What did I do? Oh, that makes me very sad. There's two pressures here, water pressure and osmotic pressure. And osmotic pressure refers to the fact that water will tend to flow from where there's a lot of stuff towards where it's got a lot of stuff dissolved in it. Because water by its nature is cohesive. It likes to stick to water, and it likes to get rid of things that aren't water. So this little model that we made here represents the second system, which we can get water to flow any direction we want by adding stuff and by taking it away. Does that make sense? And by adding water and taking it away. By actively pumping. And you can see, it didn't take me moving much water to get a fair amount of that food coloring to move, did it? Right? I mean, what was that? This is 50 mils. I think I probably did about 3/4 of the way, give or take, so maybe 30 mils of water. And boom, we moved a fair amount of material. Does that make sense? And now, if I kept removing material here, I would get more flow and more flow and more flow. Does that make sense? So if I pump stuff in here, or remove it there, or even better, do both, I can get flow. And I can actually do an interesting thing where I can basically trick the system here. I can take water out of here, get some of the food dye to move in. When it stops happening, I can put this water back in. No real amount of food dye is going to move back because there's more food dye over there. And I can just keep doing that, and eventually these two will look the exact same color. Does that make sense? You just keep at it. You keep playing the pumping game, and eventually you'll get this to be as dry as that without even net moving any water. Does that make sense? I could just take this out, let it do its thing, put it back in, give it a sec, let it sort itself out, do it again. And if I just keep doing that, eventually I won't have changed how much water is in each, because I'm taking it out and putting it back, and taking it out and putting it back, and taking it out and putting it back. But I will have moved half of the dye from here to there. Never more than half. More than half would require actually pumping out of here. But I can get all the way to 50-50 without even really moving any water. Does that make sense? Just by encouraging the stuff in the water to spread out. How is that as a visual? Make a bit of sense? Cool. Tomorrow, we'll finish this note off talking about phloem and how phloem moves, but basically you've just seen it. It moves by active transport, by pumping into and out of its cells to encourage the things we want to move. A source and a sink. This, by the way, is how the plumbing in your house works. If you think about how your house works, it is always under pressure, right? You've got water in your house, and it's coming in through a water main. Does everyone know where the water main in their house is? Does anyone take really long showers and their parents sometimes go down and just turn the water main off so that you can't keep showering? Yeah, I'm not the only awful parent who does that.
I just get yelled at.
I always say, you've got 1 minute, and they just ignored me, so then I just go down and turn the water off. But anyway, so the house gets water pressure from one source, and then when you want it to go somewhere, you just lower the pressure there. And how do you do that? How do you create delta P there? Well, you open the faucet. And now you expose it to air. And by exposing it to air, it has a low pressure source, and things always flow. They always flow from high pressure to low pressure. Everything in the universe flows from high pressure to low pressure. I know, right?
I discovered this weird video from like 14 years ago, and I watched the whole thing, and it was like scenarios of like people getting killed by it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They have some like swimming pool filter deaths, and like, yeah, you can die in awful ways.
And it weighs like the weight of a car.
Oh, yeah.